The world just shifted beneath our feet, and most folks didn't even hear the rumble until it was too late. While the cameras were pointed at Washington, while the pundits were shouting about the latest tweet or the newest tariff threat, something quiet and massive happened in the shadows. A door slammed shut, and for the first time in a long, long time, the United States of America is on the outside looking in. This isn't just headlines. This is history being written in real time. Canada and Europe have just shaken hands on a deal that changes the whole game. They looked at the map, they looked at the chaos, and they decided to build a bridge right over the Atlantic, completely bypassing the United States. It is a handshake that rang like a thunderclap in the Oval Office. Think about that for a second. Canada, America's quiet neighbor to the north, the one that usually follows the lead, usually stays in the lane. They just made a move that has left the self-proclaimed masters of the deal stunned. Donald Trump, the man who built a brand on being the toughest negotiator in the room, just got outplayed by the polite neighbors. He didn't see it coming. The White House didn't see it coming. They call it a trade pact, but let's be honest with each other. It is a survival pact. It is a message. Europe and Canada are saying they don't need permission anymore. They don't need to wait for Washington to make up its mind. They're taking their ball and playing their own game. Imagine a busy market. For decades, the biggest stall, the one everyone had to visit, was America. You wanted to sell, you went to America. You wanted to buy, you went to America. But today, two of the biggest customers just walked away from that stall and set up their own shop right across the street. And they locked the door. The goods are going to flow. The money is going to move. Cars, steel, food, technology. It will travel from Toronto to Berlin, from Montreal to Paris, faster and cheaper than ever before. And every single container that crosses that ocean is a lost opportunity for American workers and American businesses. This is what happens when you push people too far. You think you are holding all the cards. You think you can squeeze every dime out of your friends. And suddenly, those friends start talking to each other. They start realizing they have plenty to offer one another. In the silence from Washington right now, that isn't calm, that is shock. That is the sound of a superpower realizing the world is starting to spin without it. The old alliances are cracking, the old rules are burning, and this new pact, it is the match that lit the fire. But to understand how we got here, to understand how the United States got left out in the cold by its closest friends, you have to look at the secret meetings. You have to look at the desperate phone calls that went unanswered. This didn't happen overnight, even if it feels like a surprise attack. The signs were there, the warnings were flashing red, and nobody in charge was looking. The biggest economy in the world is suddenly finding itself on an island, and the water is rising. This is part one of the story of how the West was fractured, not by enemies, but by a handshake between friends who just got tired of the noise. You have to ask yourself, how does a friendship that deep go so cold, so fast? For 70 years, the roadmap was simple. America drives the bus, and everyone else is just a passenger. But you start charging the passengers too much for the ride. You start threatening to kick them off at the next stop, and eventually they decide to buy their own bus. That is exactly what happened here. The groundwork for this earthquake was laid brick by brick, threat by threat. Remember the tariffs? Remember the tough talk about aluminum and steel? Washington thought it was playing hardball. They thought they were protecting the home team. They slapped taxes on friends like they were enemies. They said, pay up or get out. Well, Europe and Canada paid up for a while. They grumbled, they complained, but they stayed in line because they were afraid of what happens when you cross the big boss. But fear only works for so long. When you push your neighbors into a corner, they don't just cower. They start looking for a window. They start looking for an exit. And Donald Trump, with all that bluster and all those demands, gave them the biggest reason in history to find one. He told the world that America comes first, second, and third. He told Canada and Europe, "You are on your own." So they took him at his word. While Washington was busy building walls, Ottawa and Brussels were quietly building a highway. They saw the writing on the wall. They saw an America that was becoming unpredictable, unreliable, and frankly, a little bit dangerous to do business with. If you run a shop and your biggest supplier starts yelling at you every other day, threatening to cut you off, what do? You find a new supplier. This new pact isn't just about avoiding taxes, it is about stability. Business hates chaos. Business needs to know that the rules today will be the rules tomorrow. And right now, the only place offering that kind of stability is anywhere but the United States. Canada looked at Europe, a massive market, hungry for resources, hungry for energy. Europe looked at Canada, stable, friendly, rich in everything they need. It was a match made in heaven, or perhaps a match made in the shadow of a stormy America. They kept it quiet. They had to. If Washington had caught wind of this early on, the pressure would have been immense. There would have been angry tweets, threats of sanctions, maybe even closed borders. So they whispered in back rooms. Diplomats flew on commercial planes, not private jets, to keep a low profile. They drafted the papers in secret. They locked the deal down tight before anyone could pry it open. And now the ink is dry. The deal is done. And the American businesses that rely on trade with these two giants are waking up to a nightmare. Farmers in the Midwest, manufacturers in the Rust Belt, they are the ones who are going to feel the chill. They were promised that tough talk would bring jobs back. Instead, the tough talk just sent the customers away. This is the unintended consequence of America First. It turns out, when you put yourself first above everyone else, eventually you end up alone. The playground is empty. The other kids have gone to a different park. But don't think for a second that this is just about money. This is personal. This is a rejection of a style of leadership. This is Canada and Europe standing up and saying, "We are not satellites orbiting around you anymore." They are declaring their independence. And that sends a signal to the rest of the world, to Asia, to South America, to Africa. It says that the American era might just be ending, not with a bang, but with a signature on a piece of paper in a quiet room in Brussels. Now, let's take a hard look at who actually pays the price for this. It isn't the politicians in the fancy suits. They still get their paychecks. No, look at the farmer in Iowa. Look at the factory worker in Ohio. They are the ones standing in the field watching the storm clouds roll in. Here is a simple math that is going to keep people awake at night. Before this deal, a Canadian rancher and an American rancher were fighting a fair fight to sell their beef to a dinner table in Paris Road. Berlin, it was an even playing field. But today, that field just tilted. Starting now, when Canada wants to sell wheat or oil or machinery to Europe, the doors swing wide open. No taxes, no extra fees. It just slides right in. But when the American tries to sell the exact same thing, stop right there. Pay the tariff, fill out the paperwork, wait in line. Who do you think the Europeans are going to buy from? It's not rocket science. They are going to buy the stuff that's cheaper and easier to get. They are going to buy Canadian. And that leaves American products sitting in warehouses gathering dust. It leaves American crops rotting in the silos. This is the part that stings the most. The White House was so busy shouting about making America great, they forgot to make sure America could still compete. They assumed the world would always be desperate for American goods. They thought the brand was strong enough to survive anything. They were wrong. You can hear the panic starting to bubble up in Washington, if you listen closely enough. The aides are scrambling. The advisors are pointing fingers. How did they miss this? How did the greatest intelligence network on Earth not see their two closest allies planning a wedding right under their noses? It comes down to arrogance, pure and simple. When you think you are the king, you stop looking at what the villagers are doing. You stop listening to the whispers. The Trump administration was so sure that Canada was weak, so sure that Europe was fractured, that they didn't think they had it in them to pull this off. They underestimated everyone. And now the phone calls are going out from the Oval Office, but the tone has changed. It isn't bluster anymore. It's confusion. What does this mean? How bad is it? It is bad. Think about the auto industry. Cars, parts, cross the border between Canada and the US a dozen times before a car is finished. It's a seamless dance. But now, Canada has a backdoor to the huge European market that the US doesn't have. Suddenly, building a factory in Ontario looks a whole lot smarter than building one in Michigan. Why build in the States where you are locked in a trade war when you can build in Canada and sell to the world tax-free? Jobs go where the money is. And right now, the money is flowing north and east, away from the American heartland. The very people who were promised protection are the ones being left exposed. This isn't just a trade deal. It is a redirection of the global economy. The plumbing is being ripped out and replaced, while America watches from the living room window. And the worst part? There is no quick fix. You can't just tweet this away. You can't just threaten to sue. A treaty is a treaty. It is law. The U.S. is holding a losing hand, and for the first time, they can't bluff their way out of it. The bluff has been called. The most dangerous moment in any fight is when you don't even know you have been hit. For hours, maybe days, the White House went on with business as usual. They were tweeting about the stock market. They were holding rallies. They were talking about how the world respects America again. They were celebrating a victory, while the ground was collapsing underneath them. When the news finally broke, when the aides finally rushed into the Oval Office with the papers in their hands, the reaction wasn't a strategy session. It was fury. It was the anger of someone who is used to being the captain, finding out the crew has locked him in his cabin and steered the ship toward a different port. Donald Trump hates being ignored more than he hates losing. And this was the ultimate snub. It wasn't a hostile declaration. It wasn't a war. It was something worse. It was indifference. Canada and Europe didn't attack America. They just stopped caring what America thought. They treated the United States like a fly at a picnic, something to be swatted away so they could enjoy the meal. And that is where the real damage lies. You can fix a bad trade deal. You can renegotiate tariffs. But you cannot easily fix respect once it is broken. You cannot glue back together the fear that used to make countries jump. When Washington cleared its throat, that fear is gone. Now, look at the scramble. The administration is trying to spin this. They are going to tell you that America didn't want that deal anyway. They are going to tell you it was a bad deal, a terrible deal, and that Canada and Europe are going to fail. They will say they dodged a bullet. Do not believe it. That is the sound of damage control. That is the sound of someone trying to save face. The truth is in the numbers. The truth is in the silent factories in Michigan and the busy ports in Montreal. The truth is that a massive block of the world's wealth just connected its wires, and they cut the United States out of the circuit. We are seeing a frantic attempt to get back in the room. Suddenly, the threats are stopping. Suddenly, the diplomats are trying to be charming. But it is too late. The signature is on the page. The train has left the station. You cannot run down the tracks and hop on a moving train that is already at full speed. And think about the leverage. In every deal he has ever made, Trump relies on leverage. I have something you need, he says. So you will do what I say. But what happens when they don't need you anymore? What happens when Europe gets its oil and gas from Canada? What happens when Canada gets its luxury goods and machinery from Europe? The leverage evaporates. It turns into thin air. The United States is left holding a big stick, but there's nobody left to hit. The other kids have gone home, and standing there alone, shouting at an empty street, doesn't make you look strong. It makes you look obsolete. This is the blind side. It wasn't a punch to the face. It was a lock clicking shut on a door you thought would always be open. And now the U.S. has to figure out how to survive in a world where it is no longer the only game in town. The master negotiator forgot the golden rule. If you squeeze too hard, you don't get the juice. You just break the fruit. Now, lift your eyes up from the Atlantic for a moment. Look across the Pacific, because if you think the only people smiling are in Ottawa and Brussels, you are missing the biggest piece of the puzzle. Over in Beijing, the champagne corks are popping. China has been waiting for this moment for 20 years. They have been waiting for the West to crack. They have been waiting for the United States to drive away its friends. And now, they just got exactly what they wanted without lifting a finger. See, when America and Europe stand together, shoulder to shoulder, they are a wall. They are unstoppable. They set the rules for the whole planet. But when America stands alone, that wall crumbles, and China knows it. They see the gap, they see the weakness, and they are going to drive a truck right through it. This deal between Canada and Europe sends a message to every dictator and every rival power on earth. It says the sheriff is alone. It says the posse has quit. And when the sheriff is alone, the town gets a lot more dangerous. This isn't just about selling cars or corn anymore. It is about power. It is about who writes the rules for the next century. For a long time, we thought it would be Washington. But Washington is busy picking fights with its neighbors while the rest of the world is moving on. And look at what they are trading. This isn't just lumber and cheese. Canada sits on some of the most important minerals in the world. The stuff you need for batteries, for electric cars, for the future. Europe is desperate to go green. They need those minerals. And the U.S. is still arguing about coal. The U.S. is looking backward, while Canada and Europe are sprinting toward the future together. This pact creates a powerhouse of green technology and modern energy that leaves the United States in the dust. We are going to see innovation explode between Toronto and Berlin. We are going to see the next generation of tech built there, not here. And where does that leave the American worker? Building yesterday's technology for a market that is shrinking every day. It is a tragedy of missed opportunities. We had it all. We had the alliances, we had the economy, we had the lead, and we threw it away because we thought we were too big to fail. We thought we could bully our way to a better deal. But the playground has changed. The other kids aren't scared of the bully anymore. They just feel sorry for him. And don't expect Canada to come crawling back. That is the other mistake people are making. They think, oh, Canada needs us. They will fold. No, they won't. Canada just found a new best friend who treats them with respect. Why would they go back to the guy who threatens to slash their tires every week? The bridge is burned, and the smoke is drifting over the border, choking off the last bit of goodwill that was left. The special relationship, the longest undefended border in the world. Those are just words in a history book now. The reality is a cold shoulder and a closed door. We are watching the end of the American century, not because we were defeated in war, but because we got fired by our own partners. And the saddest part is, we gave them the pink slip and the pen to sign it with, let's talk about something scarier than money. Let's talk about the future. Let's talk about your kids, because money can be printed, loans can be taken, but once you lose the future, you don't get it back. For 100 years, if you were the smartest kid in the room, whether you were born in Mumbai, Lagos, or London, you dreamed of one place: America, Silicon Valley, Wall Street. That was the magnet. That was where the magic happened. But what happens when the magic moves? This deal between Canada and Europe isn't just moving shipping containers. It is moving opportunity. If you are a young engineer today and you want to build the next electric car or the next great green energy plant, do you go to the country that is fighting trade wars and putting up walls? Or do you go to the places that just opened a superhighway of innovation? We are going to see the brain drain. We are going to see the smartest young Americans look at their student loans, look at the stagnant wages, and look north. Toronto is already booming. Berlin is calling, and they are saying, come here. We have the markets. We have the stability. We have the future. And once those minds leave, they don't come back. They build their families there. They build their companies there. And America's left with the empty buildings and the memories of when we used to be the ones inventing everything. This is the hidden cost of isolation. It rots you from the inside out. You stop being the place where things happen. You become the place where things used to happen. You become a museum of your own greatness. And do not think this is just a temporary glitch. Do not think, oh, we will just vote for someone else in 4 years and fix it. No, that is not how treaties work. This pact is concrete. It is steel. It is designed to last for decades. Canada and Europe have bolted their economies together. You don't just unbolt that because Washington changes its mood. They have built a system that works without the United States. They have proofed their economy against American chaos. Even if America wakes up tomorrow and says, we are sorry, we want back in, the answer might be, take a number. The seats at the table are full. This is a structural change. It is like a river changing its course. You can stand on the old riverbank and shout all you want, but the water isn't coming back. It has cut a new path, and right now, that path flows right around the United States. The psychological hit is going to be harder than the economic one. Americans are used to being the main character in the movie. We are used to being the hero, the villain, the one everyone talks about. But in this new story, we are just the extra in the background. We are the grumpy neighbor yelling at the kids to get off the lawn while the kids are having the time of their lives next door. It is a lonely feeling, and it is a feeling that is going to get worse before it gets better. Because as Canada and Europe get closer, as their standards align, as their cultures mix, the United States is going to feel more and more like an island with a lot of guns and a lot of flags, but fewer and fewer friends coming to visit. We are watching the walls go up, not the walls on the border that we heard so much about, but the invisible walls of trade and trust that are boxing us in. And we built them ourselves, brick by brick, insult by insult, tariff by tariff. We walled ourselves right out of the 21st century. This is the final chapter. The history books will mark this day, not as the day a war started, but as the day the center of gravity shifted. For 70 years, the sun rose and set on the American economy. If Wall Street sneezed, the world caught a cold. But today, Europe and Canada just bought a vaccine. They vaccinated themselves against American chaos. The United States is waking up to a cold reality. Being the biggest isn't enough anymore. You have to be reliable. You have to be a partner, not a boss. And Donald Trump, the man who promised to make the world respect America again, has achieved the exact opposite. He has united the world against him. He has pushed our friends so close together that they don't need us to hold their hands anymore. Think about the silence in the harbor. Ships are sailing past New York and heading straight for Halifax. Cargo is flying over the Midwest and landing in Frankfurt. The hum of commerce is getting louder, but it is happening in a different language, on a different timeline, and without an American stamp on the invoice. We are witnessing the birth of a new bloc, a Northern alliance that values cooperation over confrontation. And where is the United States? Sitting in the corner, counting its chips. wondering why the game has moved to another table. This is the legacy of isolationism. It sounds good in a speech. It feels good to thump your chest and say, we don't need anyone. But the truth is, everyone needs someone. And right now, America is the guy at the party who insulted the host and is wondering why he didn't get a slice of cake. The world is round. Trade is a circle. You cannot build a square wall in a round world and expect things to flow. The flow has simply gone around us. So as the ink dries on that treaty in Europe, take a good look at the map. The lines haven't moved, but the power has, the influence has, the future has. The United States is still a giant, yes, but a lonely giant is just a target. A lonely giant is slow. And in this new world, speed and friendship are the only currency that matters. We used to lead the convoy. Now, we are watching the taillights fade into the distance. The Canada-Europe Pact is real. It is here. And it is the loudest signal yet that the American era has quietly, suddenly, and painfully turned the page. The question now isn't how we stop it. It is too late for that. The question is, do we run to catch up, or do we stay here alone in the dark? This has been the story of the deal that changed the world, and the world isn't waiting for an answer.